of the kinds of kids we might see, and particularly to draw attention to another aspect of mental health difficulties in deaf children, because sometimes the presentations are different, and that may be another reason why some of the generic mental health services struggle with assessment or provision of services. So start off with a boy who's 17, profoundly deaf, has a deaf father and a hearing mother. British Sign Language is his first language. He's become quite socially isolated at a deaf college, and he's known them there for a long time, so feels quite comfortable with them, does have a peer group, but one day he went into the corridor and he came back into the classroom and said to his teacher that somebody had been swearing at him. So the teacher quickly went out to the corridor and there was nobody there. And he began to talk about voices, and he actually did use the word voices. When we got involved with him and started talking to him about it, though, what he was actually experiencing was somebody communicating with him, and he described fleeting images of signs, or sometimes fleeting images of lip patterns. And this is an important point because hallucinations can be experienced in different ways by deaf people. So if you're deaf and you have had a good experience of sound in the past, then those bits of your brain, the language centres in your brain, will have an understanding of sound. If you're profoundly deaf and you're a British Sign Language user, then those bits of your brain that are language centres, so their job is to communicate and develop language, will be working when you're signing. So if I did we have these scanners in England, in fact you have them here I'm sure, if I did a scan while someone was signing to someone else, the language centres would be lighting up. It's the same centres that work for British Sign Language as do for oral languages. But what that means is that if you're having a hallucination, sometimes your experiences, particularly as a profoundly deaf person, might be as signs or as lip patterns. And the important aspect of it is that you feel that someone is communicating with you, and that it's not your thoughts, and it's not your, it's not an idea. It is very definitely as if somebody's in the room talking to you. And this particular boy would come in and say to one of the teachers that another one of his teachers was in his cupboard last night talking to him. And he could actually experience this communication whilst he was at home, believed it was in the room. And that's one of the things about psychosis, that you actually believe somebody is in the room communicating with you. And they're not your thoughts, they're very different. If you're a hearing person, it sounds like they're actually in the room in external space and they're looking to see where they are, but they're not there. Repetitive signing is an interesting one, because I often get asked to see kids with repetitive signing, and I go along with my deaf colleagues because they will understand and see things differently from the way I do, so we usually often go in pairs like that. So for example, a 17-year-old boy with Tourette's syndrome, which I think in some of the classification systems is really multiple motor and vocal tic disorder. So a tic is where a group of muscles moves very quickly, so you might do that on a regular basis. Very common in general life, and you'll see people in your families perhaps doing them, or on a bus or whatever. And they also have vocal utterances, which are usually short, snappy phrases or words, except that people who are deaf may do them in signs. So, and that's an important thing to be aware of. Similarly, we were asked to see a 12-year-old boy with autism, and somebody said, we think he's got Tourette's, but actually he was just signing red car, red car, red car, red car. And in autism you do get a lot of repetitive use of words or phrases called echolalia, E-C-H-O-L-A-L-A-I-A, and this is what he was doing. It wasn't really Tourette's, he was just very interested in cars, and he loved to go and look out the window of cars. We had a 16-year-old girl with obsessive compulsive disorder who had a really interesting set of rituals or compulsions that she had to do, where she would count the number in 1, and then she would take the handshake for 1, and she would use it for signs, so person, or she had her communication support worker was called Lindsay, so she would go 1 and say the word Lindsay, and then do a person, and then she'd do 2, and she'd use that handshake to do father, and 3. So sometimes, and we just found that a really interesting way that the compulsions developed in someone with sign language. So you just got to be flexible and open about how things are presenting, and she would just repetitively do those kinds of things. I've mentioned before, we've got funding for a pilot project, and we've been talking about this since 1989. We've been talking about getting more money to do better services for deaf children, because there was a small group of us in England, about 3 of us, who were recognising that we weren't seeing deaf kids. At that point, there was a service in London with an inpatient service in the south of London, but that was all we had in the whole of England. And we put bids into government in 1997 and 1999 for extra money, and both times they turned us down. In 2004, we managed to get some pilot money from them to set up services in Dudley and York, so that's in the Midlands and the north of England. And this was evaluated over 4 years by the Social Policy Research Unit, so it was independent evaluation from York University, and they reported that 80% of families reported good outcomes. So they'd measured quantitative outcomes of questionnaires, but they'd also gone and met 40 families consecutively to find out what they thought of our service. And it was that, really, it was getting the evidence that helped us get money for services. And in 2009, October, we went live. So we've only been going, haven't even been going for 4 years yet, so we're still young, still babies, really. So we have a national service from 0 to 18th birthday. I know some of your services are 0 to 25 now, aren't they? But this is from 0 to 18th birthday. And it was funded by a national commissioning, so it's not local funding, so that gives us a bit of protection, not complete protection, a bit of protection. Who works in a team? We have clinical psychologists. We have in our team, we have about 1/3 of our members are deaf. They tend to be deaf family support workers, deaf advisors, and CAM support workers. And one of the things we found when we started was the career pathways for deaf people are difficult, because it's really difficult for them to get into access to professional courses or into university courses, because they often don't have the qualifications that they need to access those courses. So one of the first things we did was to try and, we have had for the last 4 years a working group that's trying to develop better career pathways. And that's included a lot of strands to it. One of them is developing career pathways within our service. The other one is supporting universities to develop better courses for deaf people. So, for example, in Northumbria, where Damien came up a couple of years ago, we've worked very closely with the university there to develop a deaf child mental health course, and most of the deaf people in our team, our national team, have been on that course now, and also quite a lot of other professionals like teachers that are deaf have been on that course. But it's a stepping stone to give them credits to then build the opportunities to go on a further course after that, and we're constantly trying to develop these further courses. Wherever you are, you need to have those career pathways so that you've got professionals that can meet the needs of deaf children. We also have community mental health nurses, child psychiatrists, occupational therapists. We have British Sign Language interpreters that are part of our team. When we first started, we used freelance interpreters, but we quickly realised that that wasn't ideal, partly because you could end up, there were huge numbers of freelance interpreters out there, and sometimes they weren't available. So we now have contracted BSL interpreters. They go on training courses. That's the most senior one of those is actually developing some of those training courses, because she's very skilled now. They also work directly in our team. So we have 2 interpreters who are our team interpreters in our family therapy team, and they do a lot of training with us. They also get supervision, which a lot of mental health interpreters don't. We have language therapists. In the inpatient service in London, we have teachers of the deaf and care assistants as well. How does it work? Well, I suppose the most important thing to say is that emotional well-being and mental health, I like to think of it in a very broad sense. I'm not thinking about illness, and I'm not even wanting to label children as being ill. I'm thinking about the emotional and developmental needs of children. And if you take a child as being one of those lines, those black lines on there, then on a day-to-day basis, they're getting their developmental support from who? From those around us. You know, who are the people that are most likely to be able to damage a child's development and psychological well-being? It's us, isn't it? It's parents and teachers and social workers. So in just the same way that we can create problems for kids, we can also do wonderful things to help them. So a teacher isn't just somebody who delivers the ability to work out a maths problem. A teacher is doing all sorts of other things all the time in the classroom. When you manage a dispute between two pupils, you're helping them with their social and emotional development. When you talk to them about why they're crying because they've just come in and their dog's died, you are helping them with their social and emotional development. Teachers and parents are doing that on a day-to-day basis, and actually that is where it should happen. You shouldn't really need to come and see a psychiatrist, and it's a tremendous success if they don't need to come and see a psychiatrist. So on a day-to-day basis, the emotional and developmental support of the deaf kids that we see is us in this room, I guess. And I strongly believe that. But what if they need additional support on top of that? Well, in England, they would go to the local child and adolescent mental health service. And we've already seen that that's a problem because those services aren't particularly geared up to doing that very well. But a deaf child is a child. A deaf child has a right to child mental health services. And why are child mental health services there? Child mental health services are there to help people with mental health problems. Who is it most likely they should be helping? Those who have the highest rates of mental health problems. Kids who are deaf have higher rates of mental health problems. Kids who have autism have higher rates of mental health problems. Kids with learning disability have higher rates of mental health problems. Kids with epilepsy have higher rates of mental health problems. Those are the kids that CAMHS teams should be providing services for. So a deaf child is a child, local CAMHS should be able to do that. They seem to struggle a lot at the moment. So what we're doing, when we started our service, we asked every CAMHS team in the country to identify at least one worker who would develop an interest in deafness. And in many parts of the country, we've set up clinics with them, particularly in the big conurbations. So if I go out to Bradford now, I'll do a clinic with 2 psychologists, a hearing psychologist. They work in a hearing generic CAMHS. They're developing an interest in deafness, and they've gone on courses, they've gone on deaf awareness courses, PSL courses, and they co-work with me. And that means that I can see them with my deaf staff and other members of our team. We can see kids and we can provide some of the support, but we have to travel a long distance. So who's going to do it in between times while they're developing the skills to do that? So I think part of our job as a national service is to try and help skill up local CAMHS. That's difficult, and I'm not saying it's easy, and in fact in some parts of the country I never even got a reply from some of the people I asked if they could identify a person who had an interest in deafness. And even when you send another letter or give them a phone call, you don't get a reply. But we're working at it, and we're kind of slowly approaching that as a problem.